You are about to listen to the Dr. Dahlia Show. Sassy, stimulating medical talk radio. Any medical advice Dr. Dahlia Wax gives on her show should not be substituted for an actual visit to your medical provider. And now, here's Dr. Dahlia.
We are back on the Dr. Dahlia Show. Thank you all for tuning in. 1-877 Dr. Dahlia, 1-877 DOCDALI. So a very, very popular move RFK Jr. and HHS made that pleased a lot of doctors and patients was the removal of the black box warning as it pertained to female hormones. Even though hormone therapy could pose risks for some, to have such a black box warning that was put on there decades ago when we've had new science and new information was a move that was long called for by doctors and finally got done. They're not saying hormone replacement therapy for women is 100% safe for everybody, but to remove that stringent black box warning now eases up insurance paying for it, testing, doctors getting sued. It was something that needed to be done because for many people, the hormones are actually providing health benefits. Well, the next question people had is, all right, well, you did it for the women. What about the men? What about testosterone? So the HHS has announced that they are going to update guidelines for testosterone therapy. So according to their recent press release, they say that they are requesting updates to the prescribing information for testosterone replacement therapy following a comprehensive review of new clinical data and existing scientific evidence. What would the proposed changes be? Well, they're going to remove the limitation of use, stating that the safety and effectiveness of testosterone replacement therapy in men with age-related hypogonadism have not been established. They're going to remove that limitation because we do have a lot of, clinical data. They're going to update information related to prostate cancer risk, and they are going to revise warnings regarding benign prostatic hyperplasia. And so what HHS is saying, and HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is saying, during Men's Health Month, we are putting science back at the center of men's health care. By updating testosterone therapy labels to reflect current evidence, we are giving patients and physicians clear information, supporting informed medical decisions, and improving care for millions of American men. They said, as our understanding of testosterone therapy continues to evolve, prescribing information should reflect the best available science, according to Dr. Brian Christine, Assistant Secretary for Health. So back in 2015, the FDA required testosterone replacement therapy product labeling to include a limitation of use, stating that safety and effectiveness was not established in men with signs and symptoms associated with idiopathic hypogonadism. So a hypogonadism is where you have low testosterone levels without a known underlying cause, as opposed to people that have low testosterone because of their diabetes or because of a surgery they've had or because of something else. Idiopathic means we don't know why. And so the limitation was added because they said at the time the evidence of benefit was limited and there were concerns about cardiovascular risks. But additional evidence had become available with the Traverse trial, where it was this large clinical study involving 5,200 men. They found no meaningful increase in the risk of major adverse cardiovascular events like heart attack, stroke among men receiving testosterone replacement therapy. So the FDA concluded that that limitation of use is no longer warranted. Now, that doesn't mean, that there's not a risk of cardiovascular complications with testosterone. There can be, but in terms of idiopathic hypogonadism, they are changing the recommendation. That doesn't mean it's a blanket for everybody, okay? Then in terms of prostate health, they say current labeling generally states that testosterone replacement therapy should not be used in men with known or suspected prostate cancer and warns that treatment could increase the risk of developing prostate cancer. Under the new revisions, testosterone replacement therapy would be contraindicated only in men with metastatic prostate cancer. Now, some of you are like, well, wait a second. If you have prostate cancer, why would you fuel it? According to HHS, they said available clinical trial and epidemiological data have not generally shown an increased risk of prostate cancer in men receiving testosterone replacement therapy. However, important uncertainties remain because prostate cancer can take years to develop and existing studies may not have followed patients long enough to detect long-term effects. The proposed labeling continues to recommend that healthcare providers assess risk, screen patients before treatment, and monitor patients during therapy. Now, benign prostatic hyperplasia, getting a larger prostate. Current labeling warns that testosterone replacement therapy may worsen symptoms, but the FDA's review found that available clinical trial data do not demonstrate worsening symptoms in men with mild to moderate BPH. Evidence, though, was limited for men with severe BPH. So the labeling changes requested would recommend, again, continued monitoring for patients with severe symptomatic disease during treatment. So, do I agree with these recommendations? I actually do. Because they're not saying, guys, just go and take the testosterone and do whatever, even though that's what all these media articles are saying. What they're saying is what we had recommended 10 years ago. All right, we have done studies to reevaluate. I mean, this is what we're paying for. You know how much of our tax dollars are going to clinical studies? And when you see these recommendations, I had a patient upset about, he wanted Viagra, but he couldn't take it because his doctor just gave him nitroglycerin. He's like, really? Is that really a thing? And I go, actually, it is. All right. Yeah, you can't take Viagra if you have nitroglycerin, and because it could bottom out your blood pressure, and it's not good. You can't mix the two. And there's so we do need to reevaluate. And I mean, look at how many warnings there are, drug interactions. And I have patients going, I can't stand this. I can't take this medication now, but I've always taken it before. Why now can't I take it? Well, because somebody probably had a side effect, somebody got sued, and now there's all these warnings. But we need to reevaluate. Are these warnings still practical? But the big take home from this, which is why I really agree with what's going on here, is they are reiterating, you gotta be managed by a medical provider. We're having a lot of people go and get their testosterone over the phone. Now there's all these telehealth companies saying you can call us for testosterone. You can, and in fact, it's still a controlled substance. You can't get testosterone. It's more of a controlled substance than estrogen is. Estrogen isn't classified as a controlled substance, and so the access is on one end increasing, but on the other end decreasing. Well, the reason why there's that controlled substance is because they are concerned that there could be risks. When people are not being monitored and checked fully in person, those risks could unfortunately come to play. So make sure you're followed by a medical provider. 1-877-Doc-Dolly, don't go away.
Hi, everyone. Super Bowl champ Vernon Davis here from Legal Help Center. If you've been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, listen up, because we have legal professionals standing by right now to answer your questions for free. You can find out if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth. The call is free, the consultation is free, and you can speak with a live agent right now. So if you or someone you know were injured in an accident of any kind, call now to find out if you have a case and how much you could potentially get.
Thanks, Vernon. You heard it, folks. If you've been injured, call and find out how much you qualify for. Call 800-679-0800. That's 800-679-0800. 800-679-0800. Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center. May not be available in all states. Not available in California.
Dr. Dahlia here. Are you tired, burned out, gaining weight, succumbing to the daily pressures of life? Well, how's your dopamine doing? How you feel right now, how you'll feel an hour from now, and how you'll feel next week is completely reliant on your dopamine. Our daily motivation and willingness to push through challenges depends on the intricate chemical process dopamine provides. Christian Kalikas and I created Deploying Dopamine, a book that tells you what dopamine is, when it dysfunctions, and how to successfully deploy it when needed. Find Deploying Dopamine on Amazon today. Check it out.
Increase fuel economy up to 7.9% with Hot Shot Secret Gasoline Extreme, the solution to maximize your engine's performance and fuel economy. Whether you're driving a sports car or a daily commuter, Gasoline Extreme is specially formulated with PEA to deep clean. Don't settle for an average driving experience. Upgrade to Hot Shot Secret Gasoline Extreme and go further on each tank. Order now on Amazon or HotShotSecret.com. Hot Shot Secret, powered by science.
I'm Dr. Dahlia Show, 1-877 Dolly, 1-877-DOCDALI. Big thanks to Talk Media Network for making the show happen. Big thanks to Daniel, our producer, and big thanks to y'all for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter or X at Dr. Dahlia, Facebook, The Dr. Dahlia Show, and on YouTube, click like and subscribe. So I went to public school. I went to public school. I went to 12 schools. My folks didn't have money for private school. And my public school education really varied depending on the school, the teacher. My drive was always there. And so I always, wanted to, be teacher's pet. I didn't want to be teacher's pet. I just wanted to get good grades. I told you why. The reason I wanted to get good grades is I couldn't stand, my mom and my family. And I was really little. And I remember, talking about wanting to go to college. And they were like, we don't have money for college. So if you want to go to college, you're going to need to get a scholarship. You're going to have to get good grades. So a college will want to pay you to go there. Now, I was like, that happens? A college is going to pay me or pay for my school so I could go for free? And I'm like, all right, I will do it. And we're talking Harvard. We were talking state schools. But I was like, you know what? I could be the first person in my family to graduate college. And I was really excited about that. And so my drive was unmatchable. But it was very interesting going to 12 schools, going to, having different teachers, seeing, who stressed what, who didn't. And it's really a combination of things. If you're going to become proficient in something. Well, I looked at a local statistic. I live in southern Nevada, and I'm looking at these statistics for Clark County, Clark County is like the 5th largest school district in the country. And they're saying that for math, our math proficiency, where students are just proficient, we're not talking about stellar, 1,600 SAT scores, sort of, or 800 when you do the math separately. Math proficiency was 21.1% for high school. So only 1 in 5 high school students in Las Vegas is proficient in math. Middle school was a little better, 1 in 4 students, roughly, 27%. Elementary school, 39.6. 60% of our kids are not proficient in math. This is coming from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. English language arts was a little better, but still abysmal. 45.6% in elementary school, 42.9% proficient in middle school, high school nearly 50% at 48.9%. What about science? State assessments said that the levels span anywhere from 20 to 34%. Yet there's still a 90% graduation rate. That's kind of embarrassing. Why? Why do we rank so low? In fact, Nevada, from what we're learning, according to U.S. World and News Report, we rank between 46th and 48th nationwide. Is it because we don't have enough teachers? Is it because we have a lot of call-outs? So with substitutes, you don't have the consistency? Now, I talk about how things really changed after Obamacare. Because if you can't keep your doctor, you're getting a different medical provider. Without that consistency, how do we know you're falling off the curve? And we could look at numbers, we could look at your blood pressure, we could look at that, but it takes a lot of time. And then we need to try to go back and figure out what happened and what you started, what you did. You know how many times I'll recommend something to a patient and the patient said, no, I tried that a year or two ago. What about this? I did that. But if I was their doctor the whole time, I would know that. Same thing with education. If somebody has the same teacher throughout the year, or the same program, it'll be easier to identify who's fallen off the curve. So the question I get from a lot of parents is, if public school doesn't get their act together, what else can we do? Where else can we go? The average person does not have $15,000 to $30,000 a year for private school. And I put my sons in private school. But it wasn't because I doubted the education in the public school system, because I really was an advocate of them being in, public school, because I was in public school. And, I wanted access to sports, etc. The thing is I did it for safety reasons, because we had house break-ins and people were, stalking me and things like that. And I didn't want the kids feeling unsafe. So we enrolled them, not because we wanted them to get the best education. I thought they would still get a good education in public school, but because I wanted them safe, and they were at a place that had a guard. And, was it worth the money? In retrospect, I probably could have hired somebody for security cheaper, but they did get a good education. I'm really, really happy about that. But look at what happened in the news, where one of the private schools, main private schools, Alexander Dawson, has now this big investigation where and it only goes up to 8th grade, where on a school trip a boy got raped by other boys, and it got videotaped and spread around other students, and that happened at a private school. You think parents are going to want to spend that kind of money, or think there's going to be safety in that school? So, for those individuals who are like, we don't have the money for private school. We don't have it's ridiculous. What do we do to make sure our kid gets proficient? Well, there's a few options. One is getting a tutor, but how do you do that? You don't want, tutors are expensive. Tutors could be really expensive. So there's some options. I'm looking at standtogether.org, where they suggest some like micro schools. Micro schools are small community-based learning environments that'll serve fewer than 150 students. They may mix age groups and prioritize personalized project-based learning. It also allows educators to adapt the learning to each student's pace and individual interests. Apparently there was one in Virginia who is doing really well. There's hybrid homeschool models, where they combine the structure of traditional schools with the freedom of homeschooling, where students might attend in-person classes a few days a week and then learn at home the rest of the time. For parents, the hybrid models offer community and structure without sacrificing choice. They say they can stay closely involved in their child's education while assessing a network of educators and resources. There's pods. Remember I talked about these little learning pods? Where I predicted, although it wasn't this definition, my definition of a little learning pod is you and parents get, 5, 6, 7 of you guys together, small little pod. And the parents take turns overseeing the homeschooling. And this way you only need to take one day off work. And then the kids do the other. So there's a parent each day, and they alternate, and, everybody takes turns. And it's kids getting to be with other kids, but it's a small pod. Stand Together describes the pod with play-based learning, cultural traditions, interest-led learning, multi-age collaboration where siblings and children of varying ages. But I consider the pod where you get other like-minded families together, and it's like, we're going to teach our kids. We're gonna homeschool, but we're gonna make sure they're not just alone doing homeschooling. They're with other kids. We're gonna have them work on projects together, etc. There's virtual schools, online schools. I don't necessarily like online. I'd rather the kids have in-person access. But if you are feeling your kid is not getting what they need to at the public school, you might need to supplement with some online or virtual learning. There's other sort of, sometimes your church might have a private school. A lot of churches do. That might help. What I recommend is, you don't know what to advance your child in if you don't know what your child is capable of. You have to look at their homework. You have to look at what they're, and I know, I remember for me, my son was in engineering, and I was like, let me help you, because I tutored for years, and he was now beyond what I could do. I'm like, looks like I can't help you anymore. That was like the worst feeling in the world, where I couldn't help my son, because I could always help them with their homework. And then all of a sudden, he's in engineering in college, and I'm like, okay, I don't understand any of this. Okay, this is too tough. But, start when your kids are young. Look at their textbooks. which sadly are now online, but look at the textbooks and then look at what's being tested. And, if you think what they're testing is appropriate and then they're struggling with that, then, we might need to get them a tutor. You might need to talk to the school. But if you're looking at what's being tested, going, this has nothing to do with what was in the chapter, well, now you know why they're failing in proficiency. So it's really easy to diagnose the problem if it's a teacher or not. And also talk to the school principal going, what ideas do you have so my kid isn't only 21% proficient? 1-877-DOC-DOLLY.
At Hot Shot Secret, we share the science behind common diesel problems and their solutions. For example,
Diesel fuel cetane levels.
in many states, the cetane rating in diesel fuel is 42 to 45. Most diesel engines operate more efficiently with a cetane rating of 48 to 50. One treatment of Hot Shot Secret Diesel Extreme will raise your cetane 7 points, increase fuel economy, and improve cold starts. Due to a cleaner burn, there are less hydrocarbons and particulate matter in your exhaust. This reduces the blockage of your diesel particulate filter. Using Diesel Extreme generates 83% less DPF regenerations. The 6-in-1 Diesel Extreme formula also includes the most concentrated detergent on the market, lubricity enhancer, water demulsifier, rust and corrosion inhibitors, and a fuel stabilizer.
Hot Shot Secret Diesel Extreme is available nationwide at truck stops, fine farm and auto stores, and online at hotshotsecret.com. Hot Shot Secret, powered by science.
Back on Dr. Dahlia Show. Thank you all for tuning in. 1-877-Dr. 1-877-DOCDALI. For those of you who really, really loved Game of Thrones, I would check out House of the Dragon. No spoilers here, but House of the Dragon, fantastic. Episode 1 of season 3. Finally, every 2 years, as opposed to Game of Thrones, where every year, every summer, you would get a new season. And they would very smartly time it in the summer because it would end right before football season. Sunday night is usually the big HBO. Remember, Sopranos was Sunday night. Everybody, Sunday night is like the big viewing night, for shows. And the reason why is because we're so used to watching football on Sunday night that when football ends, people are like, well, now what do I do Sunday night? So a lot of these shows then release then, or drop then. So your Game of Thrones always likes to secure that 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern time. I love being West Coast because I got to tell you, I don't know how you guys do Super Bowl, how you guys watch football where the games go, way into midnight. I was in New York watching one of the hockey games and one of the basketball games. And it's like I wanted to go to bed and it was 12:30 at night. We were in overtime and I was like, oh my God, how do you guys do this? But without giving you guys spoilers, for those of you thinking, no, it's not worth it. It was. I know people are always concerned how much politics is in there. Is there going to be woke? Is there? Hollywood will always infuse some politics, etc. But their focus isn't the politics. And I've seen this with shows where it's all about the what can we do to make a statement? Like The Boys. I don't know if you've watched The Boys on, it's either Apple or Amazon Prime. I forget. Where all they are doing is everything they do is about insulting Trump and the Republicans and all that. And it's a good show if they could get past the politics. It's a good story, but they just mess it up because they try to do so much in politics. Now, I look at it as a win if the politics is very minimal. Having a diversified cast is fantastic. Diversity is a good thing in Hollywood. But when you try to say, well, this is the norm in terms of incest, like Game of Thrones was criticized for incest. And then there's that brought up in House of the Dragon. And so incest is not normalized. Unfortunately, yes, we do have some rare cases of that. but that's not the norm. And so a lot of people have issues with that. But if you could get past that, right, the dragons, the battle scenes, pretty good. And so, Hollywood, I think, is learning, and they're realizing if there's a good story and there's good action and you could keep them entertained and you could try to appeal to the majority of Americans, you'll be successful. And, that's what they're doing. Now, some people have, told me, look, Dahlia, I don't like seeing, all the people in power are women or they're trying to make a statement. And I'm like, I have no problem with women in power in these TV shows. My issue is when it's like, well, we got to make the person a woman. So let's just, boom, this person is queen. But when you look at Cersei, who ascended, when you watch their path and you see how the ascension happened, or when you look at Khaleesi, it's a beautiful story. And then and I'm not saying every, a woman has to earn it and a man doesn't, but I think anybody who earns being king, do you really respect somebody who was just born into it? And it's like, or did they do kingly things? Did they, King Charles, for example, has really grown his respect and his admiration because people always thought of him as, well, he's the son, so he's going to get to be king no matter what. And, he's impressing people. And so, if you impress upon, that this is something that wasn't, okay, well, we're just doing it because the movie or the TV show has to check a box, it's not going to do well. I always bring up that Lethal Weapon 3, Renee Russo's role where she was, not FBI, she was internal affairs. And, here she is, and you're like, okay, well, what's she going to do? And all of a sudden she could kick somebody's butt. And so immediately they, and this was in the 90s, they were like, okay, wait a second. Okay, this woman's got some grit. Okay, she could kick some butt. It didn't look like, they just made her look like Supergirl. She actually, and so then you feel like, okay, wait a second, they earned that role. That makes sense. Why did Maverick in Top Gun, the first one, why was Tom Cruise's, punky kid, considered so good? Well, because in the opening scene, they showed you what he did. So just earn where you're at. Earn, and it's good. And, women in power, women have always been in power, Queen Elizabeth, etc. So it's not that far-fetched. But, it was pretty good, so I'd recommend that. Another thing that I saw that my son got me onto was Chad Power. Chad Powers, I remember seeing some of the previews, and it's like, I was like, oh, a football show. Okay, I like that, but I never had time to watch it. But the episodes are pretty short. The season is short, and it's basically played by Glenn Powell, who ends up, again, I don't want to, do spoilers, but what the preview show is, he's got a promising football career. It ends up becoming a disaster. And so he wants to transform himself into a new football sensation. And very funny. With them, they really balanced the politics, which I thought was pretty good. It was produced by Eli and Peyton Manning. So there was a little bit of politics, but it seemed balanced. And you're watching that because the reason why I like that is I think a lot of us feel like, how can we transform ourselves? A big issue I think a lot of us are having in today's world is now with social media and every single thing we do being caught on camera, anything, voice recordings, taping, all that you feel like you can't escape your past. One meme that really hit home for me, which I talked to you guys about, was you see a picture of kids in the 80s, at a bonfire. And it basically said, one reason why, we Gen Xers, we're able to make it through life is because nobody was recording and documenting every mistake we made. And so, something you said, something you did that was an accident or whatever. I remember tripping down the stairs of the school cafeteria and, tampons and maxi pads falling out of my purse, me having to get myself back up, throw everything back in the purse, people laughing at me. Nobody videotaped that. In fact, I don't think anybody has remembered that. I remember it, but it's not out there. Now that happens, somebody's videotaping it. And the average person cannot get away from that kid that got raped, from those middle schoolers. That tape was seen by a lot of people. You can't undo that. And so it's very frustrating. And so I think there's a lot of individuals who are like, how do I get a new life? And sadly, they don't feel like they can transform themselves, so they commit suicide. And I'm wondering if we need to, in society, if we want to reduce our suicide rates and help people with mental health, we can't unchange tech. Tech's everywhere. We got drones and CCTV and videos and cameras. It's all over. But can you go away and be a new person? Can you change your identity? Can you start over? We look at transgenderism and why there's such a huge rise. And some people think, well, it's the left that's pushing it and all that. And it could be, but it could also be you have a lot of people that just want to be a different person. And they're like, what if I was somebody different? Even if it's temporary. And so maybe that is something we need to explore. Difficult, in terms of criminal records and things like that. But, who you are is who you are for life. But what if you do want to somehow kind of, live a different life and shed and try to start anew? 1-877 Doc Dolly, don't go away.
Carl Amari here to tell you about our newest website for old-time radio lovers. It's 100radioshows.com. At this site, there are 5 old-time radio shows waiting for you to download free as our gift to you, and be sure to browse the additional 700 old-time radio shows available to you for 70% off by using the promo code RADIO at checkout. This is a limited-time offer, so log on to 100radioshows.com. That's 100radioshows.com.
Have you ever thought you'd like to buy and sell houses but didn't know how or where to get the money? My name is Ron LeGrand, and over the past 40 years, I've bought over 3,000 houses without using my money or credit, and taught thousands to do the same. Today, even in a virtual environment, we buy nice houses in nice neighborhoods using no banks, realtors, contractors, or other costly entanglements, and build huge cash flow and wealth without the hassle of tenants, all without credit and little or no money. You don't need a license or experience, and I'll show you exactly how it's done. Text FREE to 99799, and I'll send you my free training. I promise you I'll change the way you think about real estate and open the door to a new lifestyle that doesn't involve risk or rehabs and can quickly replace your current income. Text FREE to 99799 and let me show you how to take your life back and build cash flow and wealth from your home. That's FREE to 99799. Again, FREE to 99799.
As an organ donor, your story doesn't have to end. The good in you can live on. In fact, you could save up to 8 lives and restore sight and health for many more. Sign up right now online as an organ, eye, and tissue donor. You'll be happy you did. And just maybe, someone else will be happy too. Go to organdonor.gov. It saves lives. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Health Resources and Services Administration.
Show 1-877 Dr. Ali, 1-877 DOCDALI. So a question I keep getting is, why don't we have a blood test for multiple cancers? Why can't we, with all the technology we have, and here we are in 2026, why can't we just do a blood test? We're getting there. All right. Apparently there is a blood test that the FDA is looking at called Gallery. It's supposed to detect multiple different types of cancer in one test. The FDA may approve it later this year. According to NPR, if this happens, experts say such tools will have the power to revolutionize cancer screening. I wouldn't get too optimistic, but this would be very, 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 very cool. They say currently in the U.S., it's common to screen for 5 cancers, but we would do like CT for lung cancer, colonoscopy, mammograms for breast cancer, pap smears for cervical cancer, PSA for prostate. But the Gallery test can detect small amounts of DNA or other cancer markers for up to 50 cancers in one single vial of blood. Why? Well, because cancer gives off different DNA. So even though cancer can be chaotic, there are some similarities, excuse me, between, a colon cancer cell and another colon cancer cell, or a breast cancer cell, or a prostate cancer cell, etc. So to pick up these biomarkers or their DNA is plausible. It is. But why the delay? Well, I'll talk about that in a second. According to NPR, Gallery and another test called Cancer Guard by Exact Sciences are both multi-cancer early detection kits that already can be ordered in the U.S. under a special FDA designation. They say a more rigorous FDA approval process will be necessary for the test to actually get covered by Medicare or other insurance. Now, keep in mind, these tests can be very, very expensive. I remember back in, I don't know if it was 05, 06, I did my BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene mutation testing. And so we're talking about 20 years ago. I did that testing to see if I carry the gene that could put me at risk for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, the boys in my family for prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, etc. And I remember seeing the insurance was billed over $5,000. Now that was 20 years ago. So a big issue we have is the cost. Everybody and their mother is going to want this test. So they're going to have to figure out how to make this test less expensive, even though in the long run, this could save billions of healthcare dollars if we could catch cancer early. So according to Megan Hall, Vice President of Medical Affairs for GRAIL, it's a real fundamental shift, she says, in how we think about cancer screening. Instead of screening for individual cancers, we can now screen an individual for multiple cancers simultaneously. So the testing industry and cancer advocates are pushing for government insurance to cover these tests, known as MCED, multi-cancer early detection, or MCEDs. And Congress has voted to allow Medicare to reimburse the cost of multi-cancer detection tests starting in 2028. So this was in part of the spending package in February. GRAIL sets the retail price for their Gallery test at $950. Cancer Guard's price is $659. Unsure how much the companies are going to charge commercial insurers if the FDA grants them full approval. That could be probably even more expensive. So if you have deductibles, you will have to pay out of cost. GRAIL is doing 2 large-scale population studies now, people over 50, on the Gallery test. One study is looking at more than 142,000 patients in the UK through the National Health Service, and another study called Pathfinder 2 involves 35,000 patients in North America. Now, the NHS study did not meet a primary goal of seeing a significant reduction in incidence of stage 3 and 4 cancers over time. In late May, the American Society of Clinical Oncology meeting, company released research that said still the 2 studies taken together could still show a promising trend. They said in the 3rd year alone, they saw a 26% reduction in stage 4 cancers, such as pancreatic, liver, lung, gastric, and others. So GRAIL is not saying the Gallery test is a Jesus take the wheel, just do, it's supposed to be used in conjunction with other screening tests. You'll still have to do your mammograms. You'll still have to do your colonoscopies. But it would be nice for us to pick up on cancers early. The earlier we could pick up on it, the better chance we have of fighting your pancreatic cancer or your gastric cancer or your prostate cancer or anything else that could be very aggressive. So oncologists will use blood tests. We call them liquid biopsies to monitor patients who have cancer. So we do have the ability to monitor biomarkers of cancer. So the technology is there. So then, what's taking so long? Well, like I said, one thing is the expense. Okay, everybody's going to want this test. So they have to ensure that it is something that the average person could access. People were really, really upset that they couldn't get BRCA gene mutation testing for, less than thousands upon thousands of dollars. And insurance companies started to have issues with covering it. So, if these tests are expensive, just like with Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro and Zepbound, insurance companies are going to rack up, crank up the pricing of their premiums. So we have to figure out how to make these tests cheaper. The other issue that I know a lot of doctors are worried about is like what we saw that happened with Cologuard. People would do their Cologuard to check for colon cancer, say, oh, it's negative, I'm good. And then, 6 months later or a year later, they'd have some bleeding, and the doctor would say, when was your last colonoscopy? They go, well, I don't do them. I just do the at-home test. And then, but that test being negative doesn't mean you're in the clear for good. In fact, one of my friends had some blood picked up and did the Cologuard and paid for that. And then apparently had some blood picked up in his stool, had to go in, and he actually had a polyp. Now, it doesn't mean he had colon cancer, but if, all colon cancer starts from polyps. Not all polyps start to colon cancer. But his doctor said, you can't be doing the at-home test. You have polyps, you're at higher risk. You need to come in and get your scopes done. So one concern that I know some doctors have is, are people going to do the test, go, you know what, I'm negative for 50 cancers. I don't have to go to the doctor. I'm good. Yet who's monitoring you for melanoma? Who's doing your screens? Who's, we're having a huge spike in stage 3 cervical cancer because people aren't going in for their pap smears as often as, or anymore. They're getting birth control online. They're getting it over the counter. So they're not coming in to get their pap smears. So now when things are showing up, they're at a higher stage. So I'm a fan of these tests. Don't get me wrong. I am excited that we could screen. We need to screen early on because I can't stand hearing, individuals say, I've had pancreatic cancer this whole time. And I'm like, it would have been nice to find it sooner because we could do more. Having seen so many people die from pancreatic cancer or esophageal cancer, I'd like to see us be able to catch those early. I mean, look at President Biden. How did he go from having a clean bill of health to having stage 4 prostate cancer being revealed a few months after he left office? What's going on here? So I think now that people are going to the doctor less and getting screened less, we're going to have to go to some testing. But I urge that if people do this testing, they don't just say, all right, I'm good. I don't have to do anything else. Because it's only testing for 50 types of cancer. Okay, you still need an exam. All right, the way family medicine used to be is you would come in, you'd come in for your refills, you'd come in for your physicals, and then we would monitor changes. Let's look if there's a difference in your PSA. Is it rising even though it's normal? A normal PSA is under 4. But what if your number was 0.5 one year and now it's 2.5 in a year? That's a pretty big spike. If it goes up then more than 0.5 in a year. So, let us doctors do our thing. But for those who aren't, I think a blood test could at least help. And this could be really fantastic. 1-877-DOC-DOLLY.
Can you believe, with all the recent violent protests, looting, and destruction, some areas are considering either defunding or abolishing the police? At a time when America's neighborhoods need the protection of police the most, some elected officials would rather create more chaos by playing politics. If you're sick of elected officials caving in to demands of the radical left, you're not alone. It's time we stand up and declare our support for local police. The majority of police officers are important partners in protecting our God-given rights. If you prefer freedom over chaos, then learn how you can help protect the local police that serve your community. Call today and request your free Support Your Local Police info packet. Dial 800-JBS-USA-1. That's 800-JBS-USA-1. Request your free Support Your Local Police info packet by calling 800-JBS-USA-1 today.